You were talking about being the observer of your thoughts and taking the time to retreat into your thoughts. Who does the observing, and how does, when the servant becomes the master, how does that affect the individual's destiny?
Well, you know, when we condition the body to be the mind, by thinking and feeling in the same way, we have experiences in our life, you know, events that produce strong emotions, and what most people don't know is when they begin to think about those events or remember those events, they're producing the same chemistry in the brain and the body as if the event was happening. Yes. And so the repetition of that cycle begins to train the body to memorize that emotion. Those emotions then drive our very thoughts, which produce those very feelings, and that cycle over time then really is what's training the body or conditioning the body to know better than the conscious mind. That's when we impregnate it into the subconscious. So that process actually allows the body, the servant, which the body is the servant to the mind, to become the mind. Now the servants become the master. So people think they're making decisions consciously, you know, really making decisions based on their conscious mind, but it's actually the body sending signals back to the brain to have a person make choices that's going to reinforce their personality that's based on some emotions that they've memorized. So, in the process of change, one of the faculties that makes us so unique as human beings is that we can observe our own thoughts. We can observe our own behaviors. We can observe and pay attention or notice our own feelings. And that process of observation is called consciousness. Consciousness is awareness, and awareness is paying attention. So, as we can pay attention to those unconscious programs that have become part of our personality, and we bring them to our conscious awareness, that level of awareness saying, oh my God, I've been a victim my whole life, oh my God, I've suffered for too many years, oh my God, I keep doing these same behaviors and thinking the same thoughts and expecting something to actually change in my life.
And create this empty feeling.
Yeah, and people wind up realizing that they're not producing anything different in their life, and when they begin to become conscious, that process of awareness, actually the moment you become conscious of yourself and you put your attention on it, you expand, and the moment you begin to observe your subjective traits, you all of a sudden begin to objectify your subjective mind, because now you're actually pulling yourself out of the program and seeing the program separate from the program.
Yes.
That faculty, that skill, is the first process of change, because now the moment you begin to objectify your subjective mind, you're literally no longer the program, but separate from it. And when you begin to objectify that subjective part of yourself, you become more like that quantum field, that invisible force that's both personal within you and universal all around you. You emulate it because it is the observer that's observing all of this into reality. And so you begin to emulate that observation, and as you begin to emulate that observer, it begs the question, who's doing the observing? Now you're no longer it, but you're now that quality of yourself that is a consciousness, still subjective to a certain degree, but more objective than you've been. Now, when we emulate from that point of view the observer, which is the invisible intelligence that actually creates matter, we're now beginning to enter its world. We're beginning to become consciousness, a consciousness like it is, an objective consciousness. That process then allows us then to begin to decide who we do want to be.
Yes.
And when we begin to decide, I don't want to be this person with these particular traits or characteristics, and I want to be this person, the process of making that choice is a creative process. You begin to, quite naturally, begin to think about new ways of thinking, new ways of feeling, new ways of being, new ways of behaving, new ways of acting, new ways of choosing. And as you begin to think about new ways of being, your brain, from a very, very small level to a gross level, begins to fire in new sequences and new patterns and new combinations. You're literally making your brain work differently. Whenever you make your brain work differently, you're changing your mind. Mind is the brain in action. So we could say then, by the process of consciously deciding who you do want to be, the reinvention process, you're actually organizing circuits and new patterns, and if nerve cells that fire together wire together, You're literally putting the hardware in place ahead of the actual experience. You literally have rearranged a new level of mind. And if you can remind yourself every day who you want to be, and you can become so involved in that process, there'll come a moment that what you're thinking about, the thought, will literally become the experience. The moment the thought becomes the experience, the end product of an experience is called a feeling or an emotion. You begin to signal your body, and you begin to feel like this new person. The moment you begin to feel like this new person, your body, as the unconscious mind, does not know the difference between the actual event that's happening in reality and the feeling that you're creating just by thought alone. Because thoughts are the language of the brain, and feelings are the language of the body. So the body begins to respond as if it's in the event ahead of the actual event. And now when you have mind and body working like that, you are in a state of being. We could say that you're ahead of time. And so that process of creation is emulating the Creator, which is the universe expanding and changing. And as we begin to expand and change along with the universe, I think we just have to be bold enough for evidence. You talked about feedback. We have to say, okay, I am now a new personality. I'm in a new state of being. I've emulated the Creator. Now, if I've made contact with you in some way, I need feedback in my world to let me know that first, you're real, and second, you paid attention to what I created. And if there's some event or person or experience that begins to unfold as a result of my efforts inside of me, I'm going to pay attention to what I did in mind and body, and I'm going to do it again. And I'm going to do it again because I want to be able to reproduce the same outcome. Now we've gone from living by Newtonian physics, cause and effect, to causing an effect. We're no longer at the effect of the environment producing an internal chemical change and noticing that we feel different and pay attention to what caused it. That's slow evolution. But causing an effect is changing the mind and body ahead of the experience. And when we can actually make the mind and body change to look like the event has happened, that's when the event begins to find us. That's when the universe begins to work in new and unusual ways and conspires to our level of commitment, to our level of decision, to our level of clarity, to our level of joy before the event took place, our level of inspiration. And we can only talk, about this, but never really. You have to experience it in order to know. And so, I think that's the elegance of life.
And I would agree with you completely. Like with my own career as a competitive bodybuilder and a body transformation coach, it was always to practice the rehearsal of the change, and always redressing it and redressing it and redressing it until it became the reality. But as you said, it's hard to explain. You can't explain these facts. It's one of those things that need experience. But you do demystify it from a
this is where people get caught, and I've got caught in my own life with this, because most people will make a feeble attempt and then look for evidence in their life right away. They want the immediate sensory feedback because that's how we've been conditioned. We're consumer-based, comfort-based, impatient society that wants an immediate result. And so we have to be able to believe in a future that we haven't seen or experienced with our senses yet. But we've thought about enough times in our mind that our brain has literally changed. And we have to emotionally embrace an event so that we begin to fall in love with that outcome before there's evidence in our life, so that we're conditioning and signaling the body to begin to make changes genetically, actually, ahead of the event. And so when we successfully apply this new paradigm, our brain and body are no longer a memory or a record of the past, but now they're in fact a map to the future. And to live by this law is to live by the quantum law. And so people would say to you, oh, well, that's nonsense. It hasn't, that's nonsense. And you should say, absolutely it is nonsense, because my senses should be the last to experience what my mind has created. And those people in history that understood this, any great person in history that changed the course of destiny, was not relying on the sensory feedback of the environment or the conditions or the culture or the beliefs of the time. They were way ahead of their time. They were waiting for everybody to catch up to them. And they were uncompromising to that destiny. You and I share the same brain. We all share the same brain that has those faculties.
Joe, how do you define greatness? What is greatness to you?
I think about this question a lot. I think greatness is, our ability to overcome the conditions in our life, to actually to think and act greater than the circumstances in our life. Greatness is to think greater than the conditions or the obstacles in our world. And greatness is a level of inspiration where you don't actually rely on your senses to determine reality, that you are so inspired. You know, inspiration is seeing a future without obstacles. And then those obstacles are small details along the way to your end. And so greatness is actually to think greater than your environment. I think it's also to think greater than how we feel. And in the process of change, you know, when we memorize a certain set of emotional propensities that define us as an identity, that when we begin to realize that we've conditioned the body to be the mind, to be great then, is actually to be greater than our feelings, to be greater than our body, to think greater than our present resting state physiologically. And that means then that you have to recondition the body then. You have to be ahead of time. You have to begin to not rely on the environment to make you feel a certain way. And this is what I work on as much as I can in my life, that we've been hypnotized, you know, I think, and conditioned into believing we need a reason for joy. We need a reason to feel thankfulness. Like, once the experience happens, then I'll feel happy. That's not the quantum model. Greatness is having it already happen in your mind, that you know, you're certain that the outcome is going to come. You don't know how it's going to come. You can't predict it, because the moment you try to control the outcome, you move back to Newtonian laws. But you just know that it's going to happen in some way. Some mind is going to organize an event in a way that's just right for you. So greatness then is to then be greater than our body, to be greater than the feelings that defined us emotionally. And if the body's become the mind because we've emotionally conditioned it that way, to break through, through from those filters of perception that keep us always seeing the same outcome. And when we break through that emotional state that the body has been conditioned to, we see a new landscape. We see possibilities that were always there, but we didn't see because we were filtered. And I also think greatness is to think greater than time, to think beyond the past, to think beyond even the present. That when we can live our future possibility now, and we can condition the brain and body to think it's in the future by being so present in the moment, and then be able to memorize that state of mind and body, and we're able to maintain that modified state, we begin to change our destiny. We begin to change our time. So from my present state of ignorance, that's my greatest answer.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe.
You're welcome.
Wow. And if you want to follow Joe, go on to this link below, Dr. Joe Dispenza. You can follow him online, and I would have to say that I take my time very valuable. I won't spend any of my energy, time or thoughts if I don't believe in a certain recommendation. If you want to learn Joe's tools and methods on actually changing your life, visit his workshops, buy his books, and have a look at his products and his podcast. Thank you.